a lot of friends in the audience, people that I've worked with. I'm delighted to see you all here. I'm Jane Freundale-Leedy with Cultural Tourism DC, where I am the Chief Program Officer and Historian, and I have the distinct privilege and pleasure of being in charge of our Neighborhood Heritage Trails program, which I'll be talking about this evening. So far as my background is concerned, I am a historian specializing in DC history, which I've been doing for 20 years, and I'm a native Washingtonian, and I am the mother of 2 native Washingtonians.
I have carved out a strange little niche for myself. I do tours that have to do with DC's literary history. I edit an online literary journal called Beltway Poetry Quarterly, and there are flyers over here. I hope you'll pick one up. It's an online journal of Washington, D.C. area poets, and also a resource bank on the literary community in the greater D.C. area. I'm passionate about city history and literature, and so tours for me are a way to mesh these 2 interests.
The neighborhood heritage trails, how many of you have seen them? Raise your hands. Everybody's walked one, right? Okay, good. So you know what they look like, and you know that we have them right now in 7 neighborhoods in the city. This program was basically invented by Kathy Smith, who I know many of you know, who is the founder of Cultural Tourism DC. The first one that we worked on was U Street, and that was it was the outgrowth of a project she did to collect the history of U Street as the metro construction was beginning. So the Heritage Trails program really began as a fence in U Street at the corner of 13th and U with pictures of the neighborhood and some text. That was a very popular exhibit. It was up for a couple of years, and Kathy was always very proud of the fact that it was never vandalized.
So as I had said earlier, I do literary DC tours. DC has an incredibly rich literary history, and I think we don't claim it enough. We don't take credit enough. I've been honored to work twice with the Humanities Council of Washington on the Big Read tours. And what a great program. If you're not familiar with the Big Read, come see me afterwards and I will enthuse about it. But every year we pick a different book and we get everyone in the community to read the book together. The first year that we did it, our book was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. There was a very obvious connection. She lived in DC. She went to Howard University, so the tour was directly about her life in DC. And the tour actually was too long for a walking tour because I was trying to cover 2 completely different corridors, the 7th Street corridor and Howard University, and then the U Street corridor. On the web, you can make tours ridiculously long, but if someone's going to actually walk it in a session, it's got to be a certain length. And so what we ended up doing, because I was over-enthusiastic and wanted to cover too much, is we told people who were doing the actual walking where they could break it up into 2 parts. Our tour route covered several different places on the 7th Street corridor and the U Street neighborhood. And we were able to include all kinds of wonderful things. A lot of people who are familiar with Zora Neale Hurston don't know different parts of her story. So I've included here, for example, down below, this is Alain Locke. He was her professor at Howard University. Now, we all think of her as being part of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance is a complete misnomer. The Harlem Renaissance took place in 2 cities. It wasn't just New York. And this is part of the problem with DC not getting credit for our literary history. During the Harlem Renaissance, no one called it the Harlem Renaissance. It was called the New Negro Movement, or the New Negro Renaissance. And that name was given to it by Alain Locke, who in 1925 published this very influential anthology called The New Negro.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you about the historic Anacostia walking tour. Some of you may be familiar with the Mainstreet programs in DC. They came out of the Williams administration's efforts to revitalize neighborhood retail. So much focus had been on downtown. And because, of course, we are a tourist town, we always want to give tourists something new to see, but also to be more attractive to residents, and to begin to continue to stabilize our residential population and increase our residential and home ownership population. So Mainstreet Anacostia saw doing a historic Anacostia walking tour. We started with the contact at Anacostia High School because education, of course, is important, and we wanted to have some high school students participate in the research. And we started with the students. We had one of our consultants, Diane Dale, some of you may have heard that name, I'm sure, did an initial presentation to the high school students, just sort of to get them acclimated to what we would be starting. And we took the students to the Washingtoniana room. We took them on a tour of Anacostia and sort of pointed out some of the historic properties, and they each basically picked a couple of addresses, and those were their addresses to research. We did have some basic information, but there were not a lot of specifics about various addresses. The tour starts at the metro station, so it's the commercial corridor of MLK, and it's the residential neighborhood. The students were able to identify the addresses, by the use of the suggested research, and then they made recommendations about which properties they thought should be included on the tour. From there, we did a script, of course, and put the tour together along with a brochure. And some of you may know Kaleem Amrani. He's our tour guide. He's a historian in Anacostia. There was a time where you didn't cross Morris Road. Morris Road was the divider between the sort of white section, which is now Anacostia proper, because Anacostia proper is the historic district. So in the past there was a lot of Anacostia. Everything in Ward 8 got called Anacostia, and that's not true. So the tour definitely has helped with us shaping an identity, and creating a lot of excitement around the commercial revitalization and commercial opportunities in the neighborhood, as well as helping to bring more value to the residential neighborhood.
My name is Judith Bauer, and I am a professional tour guide. Many of the tours that we're talking about tonight do not involve the use of a professional, but if you do decide to charge money, the city code, the municipal code says you gotta get a license.
First, I'm glad to be here. I'm a native Washingtonian and have lived most of my life east of the river in a community called Bellevue, and most of my life on 2nd Street. Since 1969, I've lived in 3 houses on 2nd Street. In the late 90s, there were a number of challenges to Bellevue and in Ward 8, such as some people wanted to place a private prison there. Some people wanted to put a trash transfer station there, or a homeless campus, and it seemed that from effort after effort, there was always something else, and it was always negative. No one ever said, hey, we want to put a store in your neighborhood, or an amusement park, or a place to shop. All the good things I liked, no one ever said, would you like that in your neighborhood? But all the negative things, people wanted to put that in your neighborhood. So I said no, and I fought time after time, working with some of the people in this room and other coalitions and groups to fight against that. And at the same time, in telling the story of this community, I had to talk about what was good about it. Now, growing up in Bellevue, I knew that, hey, it had great views. I could see over the city at certain parts of the year. It had great green space, and the streets were clean, and the neighbors were good, and all that sort of stuff. But that didn't help me in telling people what Bellevue was. And so I realized that I had to be about the business of doing some research. I talked to somebody here a little while ago, and they said, well, hey, I want I live in a great neighborhood. Who can do some research on my neighborhood? And that's the joke, or that's the trick, because you're going to have to do your own research on your own neighborhood. So the first lesson is you have to do it yourself. I mean, most of the time you have to do it yourself. Let me just say, about 3 years ago, I worked to make sure that cultural tourism had probably about 9 tours east of the river. I joined because I wanted to see this tool strengthen neighborhoods, communities, create value in places where people did not have value in them. I mean, you know, the people have perceptions of some neighborhoods, oh no, it's a bad neighborhood. There are people who live in a lot of neighborhoods like mine who say, oh, I live in a bad neighborhood. I say, no, you don't. You know, you don't know your history. You don't know all the great things that happen here. So I had to find that history to tell people so they could have some pride and build community, to strengthen those bonds, to keep the neighborhood strong.
Curiosity is important. The way we got started at Rainbow History was because we felt left out. Rainbow History is the historical organization for the city's gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered community. We started it in 2000, and in 2002, I discovered that there weren't any historic gay sites listed anywhere in the city, which kind of got me upset as well as curious. We had done a lot of research on social spaces and places important in the city, and so we began putting together our own trails. It was a process of, we've been doing it for 5 years now. We've got 8 trails, 8 tours. We have 4 neighborhood trails, 4 topical trails, and it's gotten us back on the map in a lot of places, which was the intent. But it's also been very good for the gay community because a lot of people didn't know our history here in the city. As you were saying, your neighbors discover what's around them when you do this sort of work. It's been time intensive. It hasn't been expensive. We try to keep our tours to about 90 minutes, which usually ends up being about a mile to a mile and a half. One of the things we've also learned is that it doesn't take a lot of skill to do these. You can teach yourself just about anything if you need to. Once you learn how to do one program, the rest of it comes easy. All you really need is a desktop publishing program like InDesign or Quark or PageMaker, and something like Photoshop for maneuvering the images. It's a lot cheaper if you do it yourself. Because we do all the work ourselves except for the printing, it costs us about 16 cents for one of these, which is pretty cost effective. It takes usually 6 to 12 months to produce one though. You do a lot of it on weekends and at home, and you make a lot of friends. One of the things that we do at Rainbow History is we insist that people buy into it, either by helping us with listing the sites or reviewing it, helping with the editing. Some of our brochures are now in their 3rd printing, so they give us a chance to redo it all. Another point that was made earlier that is very important is when you're doing the walking tour, have some stories. Anybody can take the brochure and walk around and read it, but what makes it come alive when you do the tour is the stories. And sometimes the interaction in the neighborhood.
I wanted to just give a little background. I'm not a native Washingtonian. I became a preservationist in the city long before I became a politician. So that's my first civic love. In 2003, I helped to found Shaw Mainstreets. One of the things that immediately became obvious was that there was a great desire among neighborhood residents and visitors alike to have a better understanding of the neighborhood's history and what had gone on in the past. There was a general understanding, because of the presence of elders in the neighborhood that had been around for decades, that there were a great many significant historic figures that had lived, worked, played, prayed, and learned in the neighborhood. But there was a lot of misinformation too. For example, many people believed that the old O Street Market had actually once been a slave pen. And in reality, the building was built in 1881. So there was no way that it could have been a slave pen. But trying to get those facts straight is part of the process of researching tours, as we heard earlier from the first panel, in terms of being accurate about the information that you present. One of the first tours that we actually did was a bicycle tour. I generally would customize a tour for whatever group was coming through. We have so many different layers of history in our neighborhood, and so many of our neighborhoods do, that it was possible to come up with different types of tours for each of those groups. The most successful tours that we've given have been those associated with Cultural Tourism DC. Walking Town DC, as you all know, is a fantastic opportunity twice a year to explore our neighborhoods. And what's really great about it from a neighborhood perspective is that we don't have to spend all the money to promote it. And one of the things that I do whenever we do a tour is ask for a show of hands at the beginning about where people are from. We generally get about 50 people per segment, so a total of about 100 people per Walking Town DC. The reach that Walking Town DC provides in terms of being able to pull people into the neighborhood is fantastic. One of the things that we always do with our tours is to end at a neighborhood business, because that's half of our mission, is to make sure that our neighborhood businesses get new customers and can get the visibility that will allow them to be strong, viable, and sustainable. This is our service area. Our slogan is "Where DC comes together." You'll see, if you look at the map, all of the different major roads that go through our service area. We have one of the largest Main Street districts in the country. Our area has 40 block faces. We're also blessed to have an incredible list of historical figures that have, as I mentioned before, lived, workshopped, played, and prayed in Shaw. And among them are literary figures like Langston Hughes. We also have a great many individual landmarks that are on the National Register and on the DC Inventory of Historic Sites, including the Howard Theater, and we have new development. And it's interesting that folks that come to the neighborhood want to know a little bit about all of the above. I also make sure that transportation gets woven into the tours that I gave, because again, it's been such a crossroads for the city and the metropolitan area for so long, and the neighborhood actually developed as a result of the streetcar lines that made it possible for this to become a sort of streetcar suburb.
We have a project, a joint project between the Goethe-Institut and the Chinatown Community Cultural Center, which we call Time Shadows. The project director and inventor, creator of this is Lane Jennings, right here. He'll be reading a poem in a moment, an American poem. Right now, Carl Zhang from George Mason University will read a Chinese poem.
寒食 静寒食余草萋萋，竹麦苗丰柳映体。等是有家归未得，杜鹃休向耳边啼。Thank you.
That was very beautiful. Could we have a translation of that?
Cold Food Feast, which is talked about here, is a celebration that is held in China to commemorate the time when a king tried to get hold of one of his ministers who had gone AWOL, and he'd disappeared into the forest, and the king's idea was to set fire to the forest to force the man to come out. He didn't come out, he was burned. And as a result, the king said the kingdom will now be in mourning for this man. I don't know whether he personally celebrated in mourning or not, but he refused to let people eat any warm food on the day that this occurred. So year after year, in memory of this minister who died in the forest fire, this celebration is held. So it's a time when you think about, it's the springtime of the year, but it's also a sad time. And the person who wrote this poem is talking about being far from home and longing for home, and thinking at this particular moment how sad it is that he can't be there. Cold Food Feast. As the Cold Food Feast draws near, grasses grow in the spring rain. Wheat seedlings wave in the winds, and willows line the riverbank. Yet I cannot return, though home is waiting. Oh cuckoo, please stop crying sad songs in my ear.
Thank you, Lane and Carl, for your readings.
It's kind of fun. I like it. It's actually quieter than start at 9 p.m.
There was just a question about the poem that I think is actually interesting. The question was, when was that poem written? And Lane was saying about 1,000 years ago. So, but as you read it in Chinese, the sounds still evoke the same sentiments as 1,000 years ago. So,
Yeah.
And of course the sense, yeah.
That's all too.
Okay, if you look up and down this street, you see these brick, basically red brick urban buildings that we have really thousands of them in Washington and thousands of them throughout cities built in the 19th century in the United States. I grew up in upstate New York. Places like Syracuse, Ithaca, Rochester are full of these red brick buildings. Growing up, I never looked at them. I mean, that's just sort of like, that's sort of what the grass looks like. You know, you don't notice it because it's always there. But actually it has its own history, and we only are rediscovering long afterwards that it's actually these are actually often very beautiful buildings with beautiful details. And I think we owe it here in downtown DC to the initiative of someone like Doug Jamal, who saw in these buildings not only great commercial value, but great value, great beauty, and things to be preserved. So if we were doing a longer tour along 8th Street and we wanted to talk about Mary Surratt's, we would, of course, because it's an extremely historic site, an important site that not everybody knows about. But we would talk about it in terms of the house where Lincoln died, for instance. We connected there because that was owned by a German tailor who just happened to be living across from Ford's Theater, and when Lincoln's body, or Lincoln, was brought across the street. And then it was, for the next 40 years, it was also used as a house where a newspaper man published a major newspaper, but he was a German immigrant revolutionary from Germany. So we would link it in that way as we construct a tour which kind of links these things either back to Germany or to German American life or something like that. But you can really, whatever niche you're creating for your walking tour, you just have to find a way to relate what's around you to it. Because that's the wonder of a city like Washington, is there's every square inch has got its history, and you just have to be creative in thinking about how you want to connect those things.